It is 3/13 of 2015. We continue on now with the sphere of right being discussed by Alexander Kojeve in his Phenomenology of Right. We're into the second section, and he's going to continue his discussion of modalities. Last lesson we discussed the positive aspects of how modalities are worked into the reason of state and the directional sense of external reality. And in this lesson, he wants to discuss the actual excluded modalities of right, because he prioritizes social justice. Obviously, his generic concept for right is the generic concept of justice, and especially social justice. And so he is very much against a religious modality that is not socially concerned, a religious modality that is more or less just concentrated on the subject of soul. And he's equally against a secular moral modality that is likewise just centered on the subjective self-consciousness and not social justice. So he's very much opposed to anything that doesn't promote social justice. And so in this lesson, he wants to speak to the excluded individualistic modalities of a individualistic religion and an individualistic moral modality of secular moral modality. But in both instances, he's critical of the way of taking these as just being purely subjective without a concern for social justice. So we're going to take a look at these two views, and then he just makes a little summary statement for the fact that the juridical moment must be centered in social justice. In the first moment, he wants to address the individualistic religious modality, and he says that judgment is acquired through the following steps. There are two agents in relation. There is the litigant A, and then for B, there is the posited divine judge of the beyond, of the eternal. So through abstraction, litigant A posits a relation to this beyond, to this transcendent beyond of eternity, and then applies judgment to himself, to the self. So it really results in a self-judgment that is considered to be equated with the judgment of God. But ultimately, Kojeve said it really boils down to self-judgment and self-critique. And if there is a disinterested C, it is played by the divine being. And in that case, God is considered the juridical legislator of the right that is decreed by God. And God is the juridical judge as the divine judgment of all legal dispute. And God is the juridical enforcer or police, where right is realized through the omnipotence. This is where the attribute of omnipotence comes in, because right is realized through the omnipotence of God. So religion as a utilitarian modality is really a conformance to right out of a fear of God, respect of God, and love of God. But it boils down to internal self-positing that results in an ultimate aspect of self-judgment. And so he says ultimately the litigant A is just simply drawn into himself, and positing is only for the returning reality of authentic subjectivity. The actual positing as it works in external social reality doesn't get prioritized, and so he's very negative against this kind of individualistic save the soul religion that is not rooted in social justice. Now he has the same criticism for secular moral modality. That's the second moment. And here, judgment is acquired where you only have one agent, period. That's the litigant A. And through abstraction, the litigant A posits the concept of interaction. But the interaction is just an imaginative positing because it's really equal to an other, which is the self-posited moral conscience. It's more or less an imaginative projection of an other as a posited moral conscience. And so the moral judge becomes equal to, just very simply, a self with conscience. And a force is also internally posited as the imperative of a forced execution of all moral law. And so, again, self is measured just simply against the ideal of moral perfection. That takes the place of the God of religion, the ideal of moral perfection. And that which is possible as a posited entity becomes the actual projected moral judge. And so litigant A is isolated and critiqued according to that which is internalized within the self. So judgment and any judgments by others outside the self are simply stimulants that provide a stimulus for the continued moral self-judgment. So again, it boils down to an individualistic moral self-judgment, and the only interest is in subjective moral perfection. So again, there's no social justice prioritizing, and it's a failure as far as Kojeve is concerned. There's no interest outside that egoistic subjectivity. And so for him, individualistic religion and individualistic secular morality are failures. They fail as juridical situations. They cannot be juridical because they can't reach any kind of a disinterested, impartial third party that intervenes as a universality between the interaction between A and B. There is no interaction between A and B with a third party intervention of universality. It does not happen in individualistic religion. It doesn't happen in secular individualistic morality. Both of those are failures because they can't reach juridical interaction. And he just concludes just very briefly by just stating his definition, that a true modality of social justice will always involve an A and B interaction and an intervening disinterested C. That was the entirety of the first section of this book. He spent 126 pages talking about that, talking about the three-agent membership in the juridical moment. So realizing justice equals actualizing the right, and the universal judge C has an interest that goes beyond self-interest. So Kojeve is getting ready to wrap up this second section of his book, and he's given us a lot of positive structure and a lot of, especially the last 4 or 5 lessons, have really concentrated on really defining a very precise structure. Before he closes out, he just wants to reiterate that he only considers a three-agent interaction to be a true juridical situation. So it's just kind of a reinforcement for his audience, because he's going to move out of this section, and the next volume is going to discuss the evolution of right in history. So he's going to talk about what does it mean to be evolving in our concept of justice. And obviously it's going to include this lesson of negation of egoistic self-interest. So very brief, it's just more or less a reiteration of his definition of a true juridical moment and how individualistic attempted moralities fundamentally fail to be that three-agent organization. And that's